Man, I have been absolutely fascinated with the whole FTX, FTT, Alameda, SBF saga, and I try to figure it all out, but I'm no expert. Luckily, I know an expert in the field. I would consider you an expert, a former FBI agent, somebody that has studied crypto as long as I've known it to be a thing. This is Vinny D'Agostino from the Proof of Work podcast, Proof of Work 1 on Twitter. But crypto has been your beat since, since I've known of crypto, right?
Oh, yeah. Since I got into it in 2012, when I was still at the FBI. I was on one of the cyber criminal intrusion squads, so we got to investigate any cases that involved hacks into companies. But when Bitcoin came about in 2009 and dark web tore hidden services like Silk Road and Evolution and Agora and all these sites started to pop up on the dark web, the FBI didn't really have a squad to work that because it was so new. So the natural fit was to have some of the cyber squads working, let's say, breaches and say, well, these skill sets may be similar, except at that point, you're stumbling across Bitcoin, and now you have to learn an entirely new invention. Right. It's like learning a brand new language, and that's where I really fell in love with it. So that was probably around 2012.
It's amazing, and I've dabbled. Obviously, this is not. There'll be no financial advice here. If you're coming to the notsam YouTube channel for financial advice, first of all, there's probably something wrong with your head. But I felt like talking to you about this story. You'd be the perfect person to talk to. You're probably the most knowledgeable person that I know. So crypto has a crash earlier this year where it goes down to like $20,000 per Bitcoin. Bitcoin itself. Yeah. It crashed again last week.
Yep.
And it goes to like 15 at its lowest.
Yeah.
And I start going, what happened? Because there's always something, right, that causes the event. And then I didn't even know, I knew nothing about FTX.
So you'd never even heard of FTX?
I had never, I'd done a couple things on Coinbase, whatever. Yeah. I'd never heard of FTX. And ever since then, I've just been going deeper and deeper.
It's like
and
me
deeper.
with Fire Festival. I didn't know about Fire Festival until it was on fire, until literally people were memeing, and I was like, what's Fire Festival? And then I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
I couldn't stop.
You start going backwards. And so so the way I understand it is this guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, SBF.
Yeah.
He, first, he starts this company called Alameda Research. Alameda Research is not really so much a research company, but a company that's designed to make money off of trading crypto, correct?
Right, yep. That's my understanding as well. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Because I didn't know about Alameda until this. I didn't track the whole... I heard of them, but I didn't know anything about Alameda until this crash.
Right, because apparently, the YouTube videos that I've watched, that's the research that I do. They say that he kind of first, after graduating MIT, he realized, I think the first stuff he was doing was buying crypto off the U.S. marketplace and then selling it off the Japanese marketplace and making a profit and realizing that you can make money just through trading.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then with profits from Alameda and whatever else, he launches this company, FTX,
right,
which is a crypto marketplace.
Right. An exchange that you can buy and sell and trade different types of cryptocurrencies.
Right, which is like Coinbase or anything else.
Exactly.
And I think that's already where things get confusing for people, because I think that a lot of times when you're using a crypto exchange, people don't realize that they don't own the coin that they just bought. I can buy Bitcoin off of one of these crypto exchanges
and never actually own Bitcoin. You could buy, and I talk to people all the time. They say, "Oh, I have X amount in Bitcoin. I purchased whatever," and I'm like, "Where?" And they'll say, "What exchange?" I'm like, "So you have an IOU for that amount, and if the company still exists when you decide to withdraw it," and they look at me like all googly eyed, like, I'm like, "But you understand what I'm saying?" They go, "What's the difference between that and a bank?" And like we were talking about, the difference is you have a much more confidence, much more reliability in a traditional bank, that when I go to Chase to withdraw my funds, that my funds will be there, that I'll have the money. you should have no confidence in any exchange. I don't care, how long they've been around. And I've been dealing with some really good ones. I mean, shit, I was dealing with Coinbase back in 2012, 13, 14 when I was at the FBI. And I use Coinbase and I use Gemini, but I still leave nothing there. You just don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And this space is so new and it's so unregulated. And when I'm saying unregulated, I'm not talking about regulating the coins themselves. I'm talking about the exchanges themselves being unregulated because, well, we could talk about that, but there's a lot of reasons. So you're putting your money someplace and hoping that the company's still around and solvent. That's like mistake number one, I think, for people dealing with this.
So when SBF launches FTX, he also launches FTT,
right?
Which is his own token,
right? His own token out of the ether. He designed, like everyone. It's like all the trend. Like you're nobody unless you have your own cryptocurrency. You create your own coin in your basement. Which, by the way, is how Doge started with. But those days are gone. Like the idea that you can create a token and use it like you could a Bitcoin. Again, it's like someone photocopying the U.S. Constitution and being like, I made my own Constitution. And you're like, well, you got rid of like due process clause. There's no First Amendment. You're like, it's the same thing. It's totally different. Like, it becomes a bastardized version of the original and it has no value. So yes, he prints his own money and then, says, look how rich I am. I made my own money and I'm selling it to people who are in the know, right? Alameda and other companies are buying it, giving it value. And then you're using that to say, I own X amount in this fake currency, this fake money, to get real loans. So it's like, when you think about it, you're like, how insane is that? Like, imagine going to a bank and they're like, what do you have as collateral? And you're like, well, I got my house. Like, okay. And I got my car. And like, yeah, I also made my own money. And I own, coincidentally, I own 8 billion of it. Like, I'm the richest guy in the world. It's Vinny bucks. And it's like, you would say, well, that doesn't count. Like, you can't just do that. But here we are. In 2022, where it's actually become, in a weird way, almost too accepted that there's 10,000, 15,000 different types of cryptocurrency. It's absurd.
And I also think it's because, like you said, crypto is so new. And the last thing that you want to do, the worst thing that you could do is sound stupid or out of date, right?
Yeah.
So you just agree with this stuff that doesn't make any sense to you because it's so new that you feel like the reason it doesn't make sense to you is because you're not in the know,
right?
Not because it just doesn't make sense.
No, yeah, and that's very true because the more you learn about something, if it's legit, the more it should make sense.
Right.
So if you spend time doing it and you're still wheels are spinning, unless you're a complete moron, something should start to click. Like every time we have our conversation about Bitcoin, I think, and this is true for me, I'm still learning about it, but when I was learning about it initially and I went into it with the idea that it was a Ponzi scheme scam, because you have to remember, from my perspective then, I'm looking at the only people using it were criminals. It's being used in the dark web. It's being used for shitty purposes. So I'm thinking, there's no way that this could actually have any inherent value. And then I go into it starting to study, well, okay, how does the blockchain work? How does these connections, how do these transactions link together? And I'm looking for, oh, that's the scam. That's the point where the guy who's running this all can just flip this switch and now he's the rich guy. But you never find that. And you go through that analysis and you go, so it really is independently very special and unique and very hard money. But when you look at all other coins, they'll ultimately fail that same test because at some point they insert trust into a human. They'll insert, Ethereum, you have Vitalik. You have a leader, a guy who's fallible, who's going to, change the way things are done that he could to benefit himself and others. I don't like that idea. I just want the mathematics.
And the same is said for an exchange, right?
Yeah, same exact concept, except you're just saying, now put all your shitty tokens here, and you have a couple of overlords of the shitty token palace who then will decide how to manipulate that. Like, think about it. If you're holding a bunch of coin, you're an exchange, and you know that you can manipulate the price of it, which will cause things to go up and down in your favor. You can very easily say, I want my Bitcoin to go up and my Ethereum to go down, and very easily manipulate the cost of those things on your exchange, which will then have a ripple effect to every other exchange because they'll see, oh, Coinbase is selling this a little higher. It's a little, let's go a little bit higher, a little bit higher. Next thing you know, you're manipulating the cost of this thing on the market for no other reason than you just decided to. Now, people say all the time, well, couldn't the stock market do? Yeah, that happens all the time. But the difference is we have hundreds of years of enforcement and regulation in and around that. So that it's much harder to do that and get away with it than it is to do this in crypto. In crypto, you could basically do it 9 out of 10 times. You'll probably get away with it.
Yeah, it's still a Wild West. And this is okay. So, and then at this point in the story is where things start to get weird. So it starts to get real popular, a little fishy, but popular because they add in that they're giving like big returns on people who leave their money on the platform. Like there's like 8% return if you leave your money
and
on the app.
And I gotta say, I remember at the peak of this when Bitcoin was close in the 50s and 60s, and these companies like BlockFi and I think Celsius and a handful of other ones were basically saying, you leave your coin with us and we'll just pay you interest on this to let it sit there. And I gotta admit, there was a moment when I was tempted.
Sure, it's 8%.
I'm looking at the math and I'm like, all right, but the catch is, it's like the devil's, all you got to do is sign this piece of paper. And, you're like, that's all I have to do. It's like, that's all you got to do. But it's your soul.
Yeah.
And when you give your keys, that's your Bitcoin soul that you're giving away. You're basically saying, here's everything you need to take this away from me. And I'm hoping you'll honor the returns you're promising me. And then if I want it back, that I can get it back and you'll give it back. And then I'm glad I didn't, because you look a year afterwards and all these companies went under because they were taking your Bitcoin as a customer and then leveraging it against other investments that were shitty. And then everything collapses and they go, we don't have any money left. And you go, but,
what do you mean?
What do you mean? Like,
what about all my money?
Yeah, it's like on that scene in Casino where what's his face takes his money. Tommy is the character, Joe Pesci. And he invests money and he's at Sam Rothstein's house. This is when Sam's wearing the robe. And the stockbroker guy shows up with his briefcase and he's like, you've been ducking my calls. And the stockbroker guy's like, listen, I don't know what to tell you. I told you there were certain risks with this investment. He goes, yeah, I think I want my money back. And he's like, what, are you going to strong arm me? And then he basically is like, yeah, I'm going to smash your head in with a bat if you don't give me my money back. Except we don't have that power in real life as consumers. They'd be like, yeah, we're not giving your money. And you're like, well, that was my kid's college fund.
Right.
So, now what? But
and people and the question now with 2020 hindsight would be, well, okay, when they start offering these 8% rates and stuff like that, just to keep your money in the exchange, wouldn't you go, how can they afford this? This doesn't make sense. But it's insane. And you don't know if this was all a master plan or if this is just some weird sociopathic, who knows? But at the same time, SBF, I'm getting all these initials mixed up, SBF established a reputation as being the most generous billionaire in the world. Right. Yeah. So people go, well, how can he afford to give me 8% back? Because he's generous.
He's so generous. He's like Santa Claus for crypto. Yeah. Yeah. You bring up a good point too. Like the return on it part of it, that's where the greed comes into, where you want that money and you're like, how could they do it? And people at the end don't care. They go, well, they're just doing it. So who gives a shit if they're doing it? But yeah, he got a reputation as being very generous. So I think some people bought into this because he came on the back of the Luna Terra collapse and was like the white knight in that scenario and bailed out a lot of people in that.
Yes.
And so he became like now the new poster child for like how ethical cryptocurrency exchanges should operate. And then here we are now, a few months later, 4 months later, and inside of a week, the tweet went from everything's fine, we have money, to literally he's in Dubai, like running from the law in a week span. I mean, legitimate businesses don't go under in a week.
It can't.
It's like a ship sinking. A ship like the Titanic takes hours to sink.
Right.
If you said, well, it sunk in a matter of seconds, you say, well, that's not a natural way for a boat to sink. It must have been a torpedo. It must have been a landmine. It must have been sabotage. So something. In the other point you bring about whether it's a bad master plan, a lot of these people, I think, are delusional, and they're not necessarily unethical and go into this saying, I'm going to scam. Like Theranos is a great example. Even Billy McFarlane with Fire Festival, Elizabeth Holmes with Theranos. I do believe that a lot of these people start to believe their own hype And this is a very dangerous thing, right? You know, for anybody in life is, you know, you're never as good as you think you are when you win, and you're never as bad as you think you are when you lose. You have to stay somewhere in between because, you know, either direction is really, really bad. And when you're being told you're a genius, you're the next Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs was one. It is jarring.
Yeah.
How many lunatics think that they're
the
Steve
next
Jobs?
Steve Jobs. Yeah. And then you have people around them who don't know enough. They assume, well, people really didn't understand the iPhone, and that was a great success. So maybe this new thing is like the next iPhone, and I don't want to be the idiot that says, you know, how do you fit 37 medical devices in the size of something the size of a laser printer when every other company in the world, it's the size of a desk?
Right.
Something doesn't make sense here. Like, what is your whiz-bang technology? And then when you ask and they say, we're not showing it to you, normal people would say, yeah, because it doesn't exist, because it's a scam. But I think now with the what we have happening with young people, with you know, the fake it till you make it mentality, especially around technology, and this is discussed in a few documentaries about Elizabeth Holmes. You know, the startup, what happens with these technical or these technology based startups, and you have these people that end up like a black hole sucking in all this money, and everyone wants them to succeed because we all love the Steve Jobs story. And there's certain industries you can do that in, and there's certain industries you can't. Medicine, medical devices, you cannot, because there's people's lives. And when you're talking about financial institutions, you can only do that for so long until something like this happens. And we were talking about this earlier today. The collapse started from a tweet from a competitor. Basically said they're in trouble. But we'll get there yet.
We'll get there because I just, the whole story is, I love a story. I love wrestling. That's why I love wrestling. That's why I love movies. I love a story. So, okay, so he develops his reputation as the most generous billionaire, which is how he gets away with giving 8% back, because people are like, I guess he's really generous. And part of the way he does that is, of course, through the image. He's one of these almost like early Zuckerberg types where he's wearing ratty T-shirts and shorts everywhere. He's driving his old Honda, and that becomes the thing. He's the billionaire that drives the Honda.
The Toyota Corolla.
Yeah, or the Toyota. Yeah. And the reason, though, that it gets everywhere is because he hires all these influencers.
Yeah.
All these YouTubers. You've probably seen a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Like all these influencers and YouTubers. There's so many videos, if they're not already taken down, of like, here he is. We're spending the day with the most generous billionaire, or, you know, check out what this guy's doing, and you can invest here and get 8% back. And so he pays influencers
for the image,
influence.
for the perception, which was a big deal with Fire Festival, and there was all those subsequent lawsuits after Fire Festival because they were like, do the influencers bear a responsibility beyond morally, like legally? I think that most of those lawsuits failed, but if you remember, like Kylie Jenner was paid like $250,000 to tweet the Fire Festival orange cube when it happened.
Yes, and
they make a valid point, which is when you pay people to advertise, they're not vouching for the whatever it is. They don't know. You know, they're a famous person. They didn't they're going to advertise a TV and be like, I looked at the circuitry. It's brilliant soldering. No, they just know it's a company. They have their people do their due diligence. But maybe they shouldn't be held legally responsible, and they can't be held legally responsible. But it should be very clear that it's an advertisement and that it's paid for by this person.
Yes.
And that the person vouching for them morally doesn't know them from Adam, and they're just saying what they're saying to be paid. I think that would be shocking if that popped up on YouTube videos, like on the bottom, like paid, you know, those infomercials as a kid used to call paid advertisement. That sort of takes away sort of the sizzle of whatever they're trying to sell you. But yeah, in this day and age, when you have people consuming that 24/7 and vouching for this person, it takes on a life of its own, and the reality of it doesn't matter, which is crazy for those of us living in reality who think that like facts should matter and the truth should matter. And then you have somebody, you know, imagine you're like a legit exchange trying to compete with this, and you're like, it's a scam. How does no one not see this?
Right.
And then finally feeling vindicated when it all collapses. But then a month later, there's a new scam everyone's looking at, and you're like, did we not remember the scam from a month ago?
Yeah, and that happened. You know, it goes, the last kind of beacon of good posturing was like you were saying, when like he starts bailing out other companies, right?
Yeah.
And he starts like, when the first crash happens, he starts bailing out other companies and like trying to make people whole. But real quick, you start to realize that like the money, the cash that he would have to pay the influencers,
Right.
the people in the Super Bowl commercial, the cash that he has to give to the people that are doing to make people whole in the last crash, a lot of that cash was probably
Your money.
My
Yeah.
money. Exactly. It was customer money that people thought they were buying crypto with.
Right.
That is now being used
Right.
to build this reputation of this generous guy. So the reason I'm making 8%
Right.
is because it's your money that's just coming to me.
Right.
Right?
Which is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. It's taking new money, giving it to the old people, and which you would never be so okay with his generosity if there were, receipts attached to everything. So when the Super Bowl commercial hits, if they had told you as a user, we used X% of the money you're putting here for that, you might have a problem with that. Now you might say, well, as long as I get my 8% return, but most people would start to question, is that really a good use of it? Instead, it's like they put it into this black hole.
Yeah.
And the thing comes back out and they don't want to know what the hell happened on the other side. But you're like, well, that's important, because if the plan on how that's going to come back to you at 8% is based on bullshit like social media influencing, you might not want to ever put your money there, because you're not going to believe you're going to get a return. But people don't want to think that much. They'll just say, I'll get 8% on this.
Well, I also think that people don't think that their cash is sitting on hand. They still think that, no, my cash is in the crypto.
It's in the crypto,
right?
It's sitting there like on a shelf.
Yeah,
and you're like, no, he needs access to that, and that's what's going to be the thing with how this all unwinds. But is what was his obligation to the users contractually through the user agreement? What does it say that he could do with your money? It might say in the agreement, we're going to take your money and use it for investments. You might be shit out of luck, because technically he just made shitty investments with it. Now, theft generally isn't covered by that. Criminal activity isn't, which we don't know we don't know yet, but it's sure there's certainly a lot of smoke. But that's the problem, is that you're putting it in and you're saying, I hope he does what's right with this. And as we were talking about, before, in Satoshi, when he wrote Bitcoin, the opening paragraph talks about the reason he invented Bitcoin was that he was tired of seeing money being put in banks and financial institutions, and the trust goes with them, only to have that trust breached time and time again. That's like basically word for word what he says. So this isn't like, it's not like, oh, this happens to be a good fix for that. That's the whole purpose for it, is that you're taking something that for the first time in history you could actually own, and all the protections that go along with being your own bank. Literally, you can encrypt it, and it's as impenetrable as Fort Knox.
Which is maybe the philosophy that Binance saw, right? Because Binance is this, it's the biggest crypto exchange there is. Yep. And to my understanding, I'm so glad I'm getting all this right so far, by the way. Early on, Binance invested in FTX. And then as FTX grew, it became a competitor to Binance, and they kind of were at each other a little bit. And Binance sends this tweet out that they're like, hey, part of the investment into FTX was that we bought, I don't know, $100 million, whatever it was, in FTT token,
right?
Which we talked about it before at the beginning of this. We're gonna sell all of it. Like they tweeted out, just hey, we're gonna go ahead and cash out on all this FTT. And since Binance is such a big thing, not only did they do it, but a lot of people were like, well, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
And when they did it, correct me if I'm wrong, there wasn't a lot of cash there to make up for it.
It's called a bank run, and that part of this investigation is going to be really interesting, because also Binance came in after the fact to potentially try to be the lifeboat for FTX, but it's almost like they just shot you in the heart, and they're like, let me help you out with that. And you're like, but you're the one who shot me. Like, this all started from that. So I want to know, what was the impetus for that tweet? What did they know? What was their intention? Because normally you don't announce the sale until you're done, because why would you want to tank the price of the thing you're about to sell?
Great point.
You don't say, in a week we're going to sell. You go, we just sold, and then you let everyone else panic and sell. But you shouldn't announce that before, unless your intention was to drive it down, and your intention was to maybe expose the fact that this was all bull, and they weren't running their exchange. Which, if you think about mob style tactics on businesses, if you know that there's a competitor doing something that's not right and that could be a problem, you'd be very well interested to expose that to destroy their business. And so one of the ways to do that would get people to go and withdraw all their money, and knowing that the FTX does not have the liquidity to actually give people their money back. So he tweets that, the Binance guy, and then the FTX guy is like, hey, everything's fine. We have plenty of cash. No need to run to the login to withdraw your funds. And of course, at that point, it's mob mentality. It's, and so everyone started withdrawing their funds. And then suddenly people were like, I can't get into my account. It's saying I don't have money there. It's so, what he was saying wasn't going to happen exactly did happen. And then it was like, all right, so here's the truth. But we're 8 billion short of where we thought we would be.
But the fascinating part here, and where it gets really messy, is that Alameda Research,
his girlfriend, the CEO,
who he apparently appointed this girl that he was dating, 28 years old, as the CEO. He appoints her as the CEO. It's made clear very early on, by the way, that this is an independent company.
Yeah.
There's no conflict of interest here. I promise.
Yeah.
No conflict of interest. But when FTT token becomes worthless, Alameda goes bankrupt.
Right.
Because that was their strongest asset. Something 40% of their value or something was in FTT. And you go, wait, what?
Is any of this real? Yeah. Is any of this real? Yeah.
Because if that's a lie, what else is a lie? So Alameda goes bankrupt because so much of their worth was in FTT, which is this token,
which is now worthless.
FTX, and it's worthless. Then FTX has to be like, well, you can't withdraw any money, and everybody's like, well, why not? It's our money, and they're like, no, there's no money.
And I think there was also accusations that as the ship was sinking, there were transactions flowing from FTX to Alameda in the final hours, like a guy giving his girlfriend some extra money, like, we're gonna go on the lam now. Here's some cash, which of course will be scrutinized. I think this was all happening. This was all happening through backdoors in the system, which again, if you're running a shady company and you're from MIT and you're a coder and a programmer, you can very easily say, all right, well, this is how our checks and balances within a company work, of how when we buy and sell crypto, all the channels, and then you could just create a separate channel that operates outside of that, and knowing that this is like your little tunnel under your basement door to say, this is what everyone thinks exists, but then when the cops come, I'm just going through this door, or I'm just moving the cash out. And again, not surprising, you can't do that if you keep your money on the blockchain. There is no backdoor. There is no way to say, I'm going to send Sam $1 million, but I'm going to create a way that when I want, I can take it right back.
Well, it's not designed for cheaters.
Yeah, it's not exactly. It's designed in math, and math, math doesn't lie, right? When someone looks at code and someone says these are the rules, but people can say, yeah, but if you give me your Bitcoin, I can put it into this shit blender, and then I can create all sorts of rules about how it actually moves. And now all those protections, those mathematical protections, don't apply anymore because it's in the shit blender that was, holes all over the place.
So is that's confirmed, right? Because I had read that they had found out that the generous billionaire had built in a back end system where he could funnel money out of the company
without anyone knowing.
So whatever checks and balances, that system that you just described was a system that he put in place. SBF.
Yeah, that's what I read over the weekend.
Yeah,
and that he claimed someone was able to get him on WhatsApp or something as he's jumping like Carmen Sandiego from country to country, and someone asked him about that, and he had some answer like, "Oh no, it's a misunderstanding. It's just a different setup," or some bullshit explanation, which when you're running a legitimate company, this is something that I learned very well how the government operates and all the, weirdness and all the bureaucracy goes into that. So if someone says something to me about how something's happening at the government on a financial level, I have a pretty good understanding from living it. Like, yeah, that sounds right. That doesn't sound right. And believe it or not, even on the bureau side, there's so many checks and balances. It actually made it difficult to do your job in a lot of ways, like getting money to pay sources and stuff. The amount of checks that go into it, and you're applying it to a very, you have a source waiting for money. He needs us to go do something criminal, and you have some bureaucrat, at FBI headquarters who're like, you didn't sign it here, and you're like, he's gonna die if he doesn't get this. So it creates these really strange scenarios. But when I left and I went to, back to private sector, you start to understand, especially in technology startups, all the checks and balances that go into place of a real business, like a board of directors, about having your general counsel involved in decisions.
Alameda and FTX had no board of
They have
directors. Right.
It was like, apparently it was like 10 of them, 10 people between, I think, the two companies, and they all were like sleeping with each other. It was like a nerd Melrose Place with really unattractive people with a ton of money, with not a lot of skill on how to run a business, who might have created those systems. Because if you're a child and you have a brain of a child when it comes to a corporation, you're going to design things. I'll go back to the analogy of email. Like, email was designed for ease of use, 20, 30 years ago at this point now. It wasn't designed for security, which is why I can send you a message and pretend to be Barack Obama, and and you go, it's Barack, and you'd have to really do some investigation of like, oh, look, it's the wrong thing or this. And there's still ways to spoof and do that, but it was designed for ease of use and speed. But not necessarily accuracy, because people weren't thinking about how it could be corrupted that way. If you designed the company as a child, you're going to design it in a way that's like, I just want to be able to do things really, really fast. Well, that's cool, but as your company grows, you can do that with a mom and pop bodega. Mm-hmm. You don't need to have 8 levels of, if someone says I need to take $20 from petty cash, they don't have to call their general counsel of the bodega and be like, Sal's taking $20 to go buy a pizza for everyone. You just do it. But if you're a $20 billion company, yeah, there needs to be some sort of like, well, who's watching who? Because there's all this money flowing around, and how do we know it's not being used inappropriately? And from what I'm reading, the way he designed that company and the way all these, Fire Festival and Theranos, it's the same thing. It's all people that are like, we're just going to design it the way that we would if we just, had no business experience, and most of them really didn't. And then we're going to have no checks and balances, and then people do what people do. They go corrupt. And they start funneling money here and there, and maybe in their mind for the right reasons. I'm sure he'll tell you, I really thought giving this money to Alameda was a great move because I really thought this or that. But in the end, it's like, well, that's why there's companies that have actual rules in place, because if you had any business experience, you would know this is going to lead to a disaster, always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it always does. I mean, it's so crazy that we just see it repeated kind of again and again and again. So I guess the last thing is, as everybody's like trying to get money out and stuff, they all of a sudden over the weekend announced there was like a $400 million hack.
Yeah.
And that somebody had hacked in, that everybody, hey, and they sent out this message, I believe, that said, don't even log in. Don't even go on the app because there's a hacker on the app. And so nobody go on the app, and nobody even try to take any money out to protect yourself from the hacker. Is that what I'm...
Yeah. Let them empty your wallet first and then log in. We'll give you the all clear when it's coming to look at your house.
I know you don't know. You're not investigating this, but as a former FBI agent who worked cybersecurity and worked pretty high-profile cybersecurity cases, do you think there's a hacker on the loose?
No, I think it's like the dark web markets. There was a common theme that when all these forums and marketplaces started popping up, there was a pattern that played out, which is people would draw in a large customer base, whether they were selling drugs or whatever it may be, guns, and then at some point there was an exit scam where the owners would decide they've made enough money and they have enough people who put their money in escrow on these accounts. They would just steal all the money in escrow and disappear overnight. And which was even funnier because we actually got complaints from people at the FBI saying, I lost my Bitcoin. And we'd say, where? And they'd be like, on Agora. You're like, that's a drug market. You shouldn't be telling me that you lost your money. Was there anything you could do? I'm like, for your stupidity? No, there's nothing that can be done. It's genetic. There's no fixing this. But people, but that was common. And so this reminded me of that. Like, now that the ship is sinking, if you're someone who works there, who feels, it might not be him. I think it's probably less likely it's him. It's more likely an employee who feels like, I didn't get what I want a Toyota Corolla. Where's my and all this? I'm driving a Mazda Miata. I want the Corolla.
Huh.
So I'm,
and maybe he's the guy who's like asleep behind the wheel, and people know, oh yeah, this guy's not paying attention.
Yeah, he's not paying attention, and they're like, we're all gonna go down for this.
Right.
This guy or girl's probably thinking. So they're like, I'd rather go down with this with some money and take off. So I guess my point is, just theorizing about it, it feels more like an insider type threat than an out and out hacker just taking advantage of the site in the final minutes. It's more like probably someone, in my opinion, that feels jaded by this entire situation, maybe it's a whistleblower that wants to take that money and goes to the FBI, and that's their carrot to say, you're going to talk to me. And when they're like, well, okay, what do you got? And they're like, well, I know what happened. And by the way, I have $400 million, because that makes DOJ look like rock stars if they end up with this $400 million, whatever. So there's probably more to that story. I thought there was a statement put out by somebody, I don't know if it was SBF himself, that the money was being moved due to like requests from the Bahamian authorities to be the SEC in the Bahamas. And then the SEC in Bahamas was like, we didn't tell him to do any of this, so we don't know what he's talking about. So they looked even worse, because they were like, oh, this is all law enforcement stuff. And law enforcement was like, well, no, it's not us.
Oh, so they started by going like, it's law enforcement. And then law enforcement was like, not us. And they were like, oh, it's a hack. That's why.
Right. That's what I think. If you connect the dots, that's what it seems like. Maybe they're trying to blame it on something legitimate.
Because they have their office is in the Bahamas. Yeah. So they have their office in the Bahamas where like the 10 people or whatever, the central people go. But the rumor is that he's trying to get to Dubai.
Yeah, he was trying to get on a plane to Dubai. He was stopped by the authorities in the Bahamas and questioned, and they're saying, I don't think he's like under arrest, but they're saying that the law enforcement in the Bahamas showed up at their headquarters and started like taking stuff already. You said house, and I just had a vision of, what was that show on VH1, The Surreal Life?
The Surreal Life.
They should take Elizabeth Holmes, Billy McFarlane, fucking SBF, all these people, put them in a Surreal Life house, and they just scam each other all the time.
Do you think, I mean, because you've seen it all, do you think that it's just human nature? Like, this is just this scam thing, it just doesn't stop? Because it's really interesting. Like, I mean, it's not like it's just the internet. Legacy media, like big business television networks were like, this is the JP Morgan of crypto.
Well, that's what it is. You can't, again, how many revolutions around the sun until the light bulb goes off in your head and you go, none of it's real. Like, the media vouching for somebody used to mean something to me as a kid. A former president of the United States vouching for someone used to mean more to me as a kid. Now none of it means anything to me, which just sucks, because it may make people think you're living this sort of highly skeptical. But I found that strategy is more accurate than the other side, which is, I'm sure everything's fine. The assure everything's fine, I'm usually left going, damn it, that was another scam, that was another this. So it's like everything I look at when I'm like, who's this person's vouching for them? If that person doesn't have any intimate knowledge of the thing I don't care about it, what their opinion is at all. Like, so, someone goes to vouchers for a company and, it's whatever it is. I don't, if they don't understand it, I don't look at it as like some sort, and this includes presidents, former generals, because if that person doesn't understand biomedical technology, why do I care that he's on the board for Theranos vouching for this machine that doesn't exist? Because I know he doesn't understand anything about that, but I would be more persuaded by somebody who, remember there was that professor that Elizabeth Holmes went to several times at Stanford with her ideas, and she's like,
yes,
it's kind of nonsense. Like, this is like fantastic nonsense.
But everybody was like, yeah, because she's a hater. That's why she's a hater. She's the only one that actually was.
And I love it because she's on all these documentaries, and she's like, I knew it was bullshit. I said it was bullshit. But she bats those pretty blue eyes at her, and everyone wants to believe that she's the next Steve Jobs, and they want to be everyone wants to be part of that story. Of
course.
Like to be like,
and get in on the ground floor.
But if you don't know anything about that, and if you know you're vouching for it, and you know anything about that, shouldn't you look at the people next to you and be like, they probably know just as little? That's the way I think. Whereas those people think, I don't know anything about it, but I'm pretty sure he knows about it, and I trust him. I think the same way. Like, it's like when you're in class, and when you're in school, and you have a question. As you get older, you realize chances are, if you're confused, there's at least a bunch of other people that feel the same way. They're not admitting it.
Right.
And they're all acting like they know what's going on. But you raise your hand and go, hey, this might be stupid. And then after class, 10 people go, dude, I'm glad you asked that, because I didn't know what the fuck they were talking
100%.
about. But if you don't, you look around the room, everyone's like, yeah, this is a great point. No one knows. And you go to study for the test, and everyone's like, I didn't know what that professor was. So I learned that, like, for me, it was like I'd raise my hand and risk looking stupid. And like 8 out of 10 times, I'd hit on something that the majority of the class was thinking the same fucking thing I was thinking.
Yeah.
So again, with these businesses, you see this, you wonder if it's just purely the greed, or they're assuming that everyone else in the class must know more than they do, and that I don't want to look stupid by raising my hand, but sometimes asking the question. Now, with Theranos and even with SBF, I heard a story an investor came to FTX and SBF. They were looking for money. And I think the way the story goes, and I might be messing this up, was the guy, like the CEO of their company, met with them. They kind of heard about their business proposition. It didn't really make a lot of sense. So they submitted a bunch of like questions and recommendations. And he said they literally called back and said, "Go fuck yourself." Those were the quote. That was the quote. Like, we don't have to answer to you, which was Elizabeth Holmes' strategy too. Anyone that dared said, "We need to demo this machine." Oh, fuck you. We'll just go to Walgreens then. We'll just go to CVS then. And instead of being like, good, if they're stupid enough to do this without seeing how this machine works,
They don't want to miss it.
they don't want, but I don't want to miss out. Because,
Yeah.
you know, some guy's going to be like, if I say no, and this machine revolutions, and I'm the guy. In the history books, I'm the guy. Because there's always a guy. Remember, there's always a story about a successful startup where they go to somebody and like someone passes on it. And then you hear that about actors too, like when Nicolas Cage passed on being, you know, whatever, the star of Titanic or whatever. You always hear these stories about the actor who passed up the movie role of a lifetime.
Yep.
And you hear the same thing on business, like, you know, they went to so-and-so company and they passed because they thought it was, you know, stupid. But the truth is, they'll remember the one that they passed on that turned out to be big, but no one's going to give them credit for the 400 that they were like, this is a bad idea, that went bankrupt and they would have lost their shirts on. No one remembers those, you know, but the one that it's like, oh, that turned out to be a really good idea, you passed on it. You're going to miss some of those, but they're very, very rare.
Yeah.
But crypto is full of this because there's so much confusion about how it even works, how the underlying asset works. And you have 10,000, 20,000 coins out there, and they all can be manipulated. And then you're putting it into an exchange, which is manipulating that. So it's the scams are getting bigger because the surface area with Bitcoin it's not taking cash anymore. Cash is harder to do. The Madoff stuff gets harder and harder to do as time goes on because we have better understanding of how these scams occur, and we can monitor them through the financial systems and reportings. How do you report on your cum rocket holdings as FTX? You have some accountant at Morgan Stanley going, oh, your cum rocket's down 22%. We're going to see an adjustment here on your Dogecoin, and you know, no one knows how to balance all this,
Right.
You know, and it's so volatile. It's like minute to minute. So in that confusion, you can scam the shit out of everybody because it's like a fog of just nonsense. And I look at it and I go, I don't understand it. I don't believe very many people do understand all of it when it gets put together like that. But people who want to see money go, well, I'm sure the guy running it understands it. Like, you know, guy doesn't have a clean shirt.
Yeah.
You know, can't be bothered to put on a clean shirt. He's the guy who you're putting all your faith in, that understands not only the mathematics, but the business side of it and what experience does he really have. And just like Elizabeth Holmes, what experience did she have running a business? She was a smart kid at Stanford who created a patch that was nonsensical that, you know, we maybe will have in 20 years time, something like that. And then based on this patent, which did nothing, they were like, oh, she also wants to create this machine. And people were like, it sounds brilliant. Yeah, so does a fucking, you know, car that goes 800 miles to the gallon. That sounds cool too. It doesn't mean it exists.
Idea.
Yeah, like, you solved our petroleum problems. Yeah, I did. You know, but I didn't, you know, I'm not going to show it to you. I can't show it to you. You got to trust me.
Yeah, trust me, it's great. So, okay. So I think that's the story. That's the story as I know it. So if I missed anything, tell me. I'm not sure that I did, but if I missed
you got
anything,
it.
okay.
Yeah.
Is there, so we're left with,
So what happens now?
yeah, because we're left with thousands and thousands of people who have lost, some of them have lost a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Some of them have lost a lot of money. Some of them lost everything.
I wonder what
Where do you think
Tom
this
Brady
goes?
and Giselle's investment look like.
Yeah, because we're finding out like people in those commercials,
Yeah.
Tom Brady and Giselle, they were invested heavily in the company.
Yeah, I do wonder what that looked like and what those conversations were like after the fact. And their likeness. Now their image takes a hit too. Like, you know,
And so do all the influencers.
their
Like
brands.
there's a lot of like financial YouTube crypto people that were like,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
putting everything behind like and you know, like you said, it's not that everyone's lying. Like
Yeah.
a lot of people could have come in with the best of intentions, but they were wrong. They were tricked. That's still, I mean, that's going to hit your credibility, right?
Yeah, there's no way. I mean, obviously, Tom Brady didn't come into this like, I'm getting involved in a scam, you know?
Of course.
He doesn't need it.
Of course.
You know, none of these people did. But I think one of the takeaways is that in my opinion, there's no real way to do proper due diligence on a lot of these exchanges. I think they're so different than a traditional financial institution that when people say due diligence was done, you're like, to the extent it could be done, right, on this exchange. Like, you have to qualify that, like, to the extent it could be done, because they're dealing with assets that are in number alone are in the tens of thousands and that are highly volatile and completely unregulated. The underlying asset is completely unregulated. So I think anyone going into that needs to understand that the regulation's probably coming, but these people probably thought they could make this into something like a fantasy where you can. I think that he wanted to give away, like, SBF gave away like 50 million next year. This year he was supposed to give 500. I guess technically he gave away 14 billion, but to charities, and then he wanted to do like 100 million and 700 million, whatever it was.
Yeah, he signed that like
pledge or
philanthropy pledge where he would give away most of his net worth to charity before he died, which. Yeah, as you said, I don't think that's going to be an issue.
It's easy to divide up zero. It'll be added to the bankruptcy Chapter 11 filings. But when you're talking about things like that, you have an exchange now where a guy wants to give all this money away to charity. It sounds awesome. I would love all that. I'd love him to give $15 billion a year to go solve whatever it may be. But then the cynic in you has to go, wait a minute. Like, is that legitimate? Like, how come no one else has done that? And if it was that simple... And then what causes, right? Because what's just been revealed is that 40 million of that went to Democrats for the midterm elections, which again is like, okay, now you're like, well, that sucks. Does that mean they didn't look at FTX because the people in charge were getting 40 million? Like, I don't want my government to be getting donations and that being used as a reason not to invest. Could you imagine if the Colombo crime family donated $40 million to the Trump campaign and feeling comfortable that the Trump campaign was going to be tough on organized crime? You'd be like, of course they're not. Now, FTX was apparently a legitimate company, but is it because they didn't do any due diligence and the SEC could have been looking at FTX and protecting users all this time, but decided, hey, they're giving us 40 million. Let's just look the other way. And that presents a whole new series of problems that make us all losers. Like, if our government's on the take, then we're all losers because they're not going to protect us from something that's paying them so well.
Yeah. It's a complicated thing, man. It's a wild-ass story, and it's going to make a hell of a, I would say, miniseries. Not movie, miniseries.
I would watch every second of it.
Yeah.
I love when these things come to a head and then they collapse, and then you get to hear all the interviews from all the inside. Fire Festival had a ton of people. They did interviews for like those 2 specials. I love hearing about how
even the Hulu special on Theranos.
Yeah,
the whole
Theranos
miniseries.
Watch all of that with Amanda Seyfried.
The WeWork one was awesome.
Yeah, yep, that was another good one.
Man, we will never not fall for that cult of personality thing.
Isn't it weird how we're so influenced by these charismatic people that it's like it turns your brain off?
Yeah,
it's like a weird thing, like
we're just like yeah. No,
I'm gonna feeling about her.
Whatever she says, whatever he says, like Vinny, I appreciate you lending your expertise.
Yeah, sure.
The expert.
Yeah. Experts may disagree. So else.
You can follow Vinny at Proof of Work 1 on Twitter, social media, everything. Proof of Work podcast is available wherever podcasts are available. And yeah, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Check it out.
Yeah, shedding some light on all this.
Yeah,
it's
I'm
a
here.
Fascinating thing.
As this develops, I'll certainly come back and we'll follow through with this story because I guarantee you it's not over. There's some other shoe about to drop. Like, next thing you know, he's in a plane, like he's commandeered a flight and he's flying, to the United States, and F-14s are scrambled, and
we may have to do some updates.
Yeah, some updates as this goes even like crazier and crazier.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, man.
All right, very good. Take care.